a coffee shop a little further down there. He suddenly wanted to stop. So basically just over the hill on the eastern side of the Menla site. And he asked to stop, and the whole, like 15 cars, they all stopped. And we got out and walked around, and he was looking at the hills, you know, the green mountains, and there's a set of ridges as you drive down. If you look on the right, there's a set of ridges, and then the river, the Selfless river's over there, creek, whatever it's called. And he and I ended up sitting sort of a little while on a little grassy place there, looking at the stream, and he was looking at the hills, and he said, "This is really beautiful place." He said, "Really something. It reminds me of Kongbo," he said. And Kongbo is a part of Tibet, southeast of Lhasa, where they had great forests, you know. And he said, just like Kongbo. That's where he wanted. He said in another interview around that same time that he wanted to make sanatoria in Kongbo. And years later, when someone gave us this place, I was so surprised when I drove out to it. I mean, I'd been out many times, but then I remembered that, which is just like on the other side of the bridge. If you look to the east, so he was just below this place, you know. And he didn't remember that himself. When he came here and slept here. But he did tell me the morning I went to pick him up for the longevity conference that we were having in this room, and he did a medicine Buddha initiation in this room on this mandala, but an earlier version of this mandala. And he said that I said, "I hope you slept well." He said, "Best sleep I ever had in North America." He didn't say in U.S. or in this country. He said in North America. Been in Canada, I've been in Mexico. I don't know why he said North America. I have a plan one day. There's one piece of property on this land that 2 or 3 or 4 groups ago, when they were hard up for money, they sold off a small parcel and one where the guy built one house, so up the hill that way. And then that has remained privately owned. They're trying to sell it, but of course they want too much money. But we didn't try to buy it yet. But I want to buy it and leave it in private hand and give it to him. Send him the title. And so he owns, because all of the wealthy people who know the Dalai Lama, nobody has ever given him a piece of land. You know, if you have a piece of land in a country, you can kind of get there. I mean, at least in the pre-Trump era. You know, somehow. Is this thing on? Is this working?
Yep, it's working.
Oh, good. So I understood from Michelle that people were worried about ontological existence versus intrinsic existence. Is that right? Well, so we're going to deal with that today, but let's start with the Heart Sutra. Let's do the Heart Sutra together. Everybody have their Heart Sutra? Yes? Everybody have a version of it. And I also sent something on your email, or I asked the front desk to about an hour and a half ago, which I'm going to talk about later, because today we're going to do wisdom. We're going to do wisdom. Prajna Paramita. Okay, is everybody ready? Okay. Are you ready, Justin?
Yeah, I'm ready. I'm just adjusting the live.
In Sanskrit, Bhagavati Prajna Paramita Hridaya. In Tibetan, Tendema Shara Pachinimbo. In English, the Blessed Lady Buddha, Heart of Transcendence. Thus did I hear on a special occasion, the Blessed Lord was dwelling on the vulture peak at Rajagarh. Great communities of mendicants and bodhisattvas at that time, the Blessed entranced himself in the teaching samadhi called illumination. Just as the noble bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, the great hero, was contemplating the practice of the profound transcendence, and he realized that those 5 body-mind processes are void of any intrinsic reality. Thereupon he felt the power of the Buddha Venerable Shariputra, just a noble Bodhisattva, Avalokiteshvara, the great hero. When any noble son wishes to engage in the practice of the profound transcendence of this, how should he learn then the noble Bodhisattva, Avalokiteshvara, the great hero? Address Venerable Shariputra, when any noble son or noble daughter wishes to engage in the practice of the profound transcendence, wisdom he or she should realize it in this way. The body, mind, processes should be truly realized to be void of any intrinsic reality. Matter is voidness, voidness is matter. Voidness is not other than matter, neither is matter other than void. Voidness is matter, voidness is not other than matter, neither is matter other than voidness. Likewise, sensations, conceptions, mental functions, and consciousnesses are also void. Shariputra, thus all things are voidness, signless, uncreated, unsustainless, impeccable, undecreased, and unincreased. Shariputra, thus in voidness there are no matter, no sensation, no conception, no mental function, no consciousness, no I, no ear, no tongue, no body, no mentality, no form or thought, no sound, no scent, no taste, no texture, no ID. There are no sense media from I to mentality, sense media, and there are no consciousness media from to mental consciousness media either. Then there are no sense ignorance and no sensation of ignorance, and so on up to no old age and death, and no cessation of old age and death either. For there are no suffering, no origination, no cessation, no path, no intuitive wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, because the Bodhisattva is without attainment, she lives in reliance on transcendence. Her spirit is unobscured and free of fear, passing far beyond all confusion. She ultimately succeeds in nirvana. And all the Buddhas who live in past, present, and future rely on transcendent wisdom. Manifestly perfect Buddhahood and unexcelled perfect enlightenment, such beings, so there is the mantra of transcendent wisdom, the mantra of great science, the unexcelled mantra, the uniquely universal mantra, the mantra that eradicates all suffering. It is not false and should be known as truth of transcendent wisdom mantra as follows: Tadyatha Om Gati Gati Para Gati Para Samgati Bodhi Swaha Om Gati Gati Para Gati Para Samgati Bodhi Swaha Om Gati Gati Para Gati Para Samgati Bodhi Swaha. Shariputra, thus should the Bodhisattva, the great hero, learn the profound transcendence of wisdom. Thereupon the blessed Lord arose from that samadhi and applauded the noble Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, the great hero. Excellent, excellent, noble son, so it is, one should practice the profound transcendence of wisdom in just the way you have taught it, and even the Buddhas will joyfully congratulate you when the blessed Lord has spoken thus. The venerable Sharadvati, the noble Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, the great hero, everyone in that audience and the whole world in its human sight and sun rejoiced and all applauded what the Buddha said. Very good. That's so fun, actually. Okay, so who was puzzled about intrinsic reality, especially? And okay, guy. Okay, what is it?
It was it was being puzzled by Nagarjuna's denial of ontological reality to any experience.
Is it what?
To any experience.
To any, is that applicable to any experience, are you saying?
Yeah, it was a statement that I'd read that was saying Nagarjuna denied ontological reality.
Well, yeah, I mean, actually, to the expression, if you read that somewhere, when you were saying that's because you read that somewhere, the expression ontological reality is actually a redundancy, because ontological means what exists, and therefore it means reality. You know? So that's like saying reality. You know? So there's like there are three levels in the about emptiness, at least. But I mean, usually there are three levels. That's what's called the ontological level, which means reality. Is there reality there? Then there's epistemological level. That means about how you know something, and that you can call objective reality as an object. You know? And then there's the linguistic, and unfortunately, there's no immediate logical that you can put on it. So, you know, intellectuals, academics, they just throw logical on everything. You know, they don't say the method; they say methodology. But it's actually a misuse of the word. Methodology means the study of method. So you don't use a methodology. Methodology is studying what method you use. So they should really just say method. But to make themselves sound really special, and to freak everybody out, they go ontological, epistemological. They do all this logical stuff. That's just BS. And I mean Buddhist studies. So don't worry about that. But there are these three levels, you see. Then the ontological one is the reality level. And the Sanskrit word is a word called swabhava. And the bhava part comes from the verb to be, and it means an existent, to exist. Like abhava means non-existent. So, and swa means self. So people used to translate that as own being. I think I've been too far away, so I'm shouting too much, because I can't hear my voice, so I'm not making any track, then I'm going to go hoarse. So is that okay? Is that good in the speaker? You hear it, or are you just hearing from me? It's not good. Okay, huh? It's okay. Okay. So Swabhava, they used to translate as own being. So they're saying he didn't deny, he didn't find own being in things. And sometimes Swabhava is used almost like hardness is the nature of earth. And it seems sort of innocent there. The swa is not emphasized much, you know. It just means that then that's the word, almost like the word nature. But in Buddhist talk, they use the word self-nature, swabhava, you know, and then they put the nature to the bhava. You know. And then there's something called Svarupa. And the rupa means a visual object. But it comes from rup, which means to make a mark on something. So Svarupa is sort of something as a form, or something. It also, people translate rupa as form, and rupa can also mean matter. So, because a visual object is something that obstructs your view, you know, it blocks you seeing something else, so you see it. That's a visual object. So Svarupa is sort of on the epistemological level, you know, on the knowledge level, like an object of a subject in dualistic cognition, right? And then the more subtle one that's from Nagarjuna it's called Svalakshana. And a lakshana means, also means to mark or to describe, it can mean, but it can even mean, so it means lekha, you know, means to make a stroke of something. So on paper, you know, so lakshana is something like own characteristic. But what it especially refers to is the referent of something. So and therefore lakshana can mean definition of something. So the definition of a chair, you know, is that it then becomes the referent. When you say the word chair, your word lands on whatever is the essence of the chair, you know. But it's in essence as an object of a word. Svarupa is an essence in the thing as an object of cognition. And Swabhava is the essence of a thing as just sort of being there. It's a more coarse level, actually. the so-called ontological level. Okay? So Nagarjuna doesn't just deny the ontological, he denies that anything has an essence established out of itself. It's like Ding an sich, thing in itself. You know? So there's nothing in the world that exists that can be relevant to relative beings, that is born, that its existence comes out of its own intrinsic nature. Intrinsic means out of itself, right? Or some inherent, I don't think is that good, because inherent, to adhere, to inhere, here means to connect to something. So inherent is sort of internally connected, and it doesn't really, intrinsic comes from the idea of coming out of itself, not being connected into itself, if you follow me. Now, to really get what this means, you have to admit to yourself, which takes some sort of mindfulness about your cognitions, that when you see an object that you recognize, it seems that that object name corresponds to something real about that object. Of course, that's the most subtle level. Like, that's really a tripod. That's really a floor. It's not just, it happens to be a floor, and then, you know, it could be piso or something in another language. It's sort of really a floor, you know, and there's a thing in the floor that seems to be in itself. So that when we look around, window, wall, ceiling, light, person, etc., male, female, you know, up, down, it's like there's a real thing that's already out there before we look at it and designate it or refer to it. So it has, another way you could call it would be intrinsic referentiality. So that the sort of essence of the thing kind of pops out of the thing to meet the essence of the meaning of our expression for it. Do you follow? And so that's considered the most subtle one. And the next level up is that that object seems like it's apart from us by itself, you know. And so when I look at the far wall, or, you know, something like looking at the sky is the best, because it's something, it's so vague. You know, you look up and just see blue sky, and then it seems like it really is sky. You know, that my sky thing really hit something up there. You know? Even though now the Buddhist epistemology is so sophisticated, Indian in general, but then the Buddhists get more sophisticated debating with the Brahmins. They are Brahmins mostly, but the Brahmins who haven't woken up to that. And they say that when you do look up at something, or anything that you see right off, there's a split second where you just float out into it. You don't know, you don't quite recognize it. You don't automatically label it. It's just a moment of and then quickly, because that makes you feel insecure, you immediately retract yourself back into being your subjectivity in your skin, you know, with your senses and your concepts, and you recognize it with your concept, and you recognize it as the sky, and then you're fine. You don't get lost in the sky. You follow me? And in fact, that happens so fast. The big debate between the Buddhists and the Vaisheshika and Nyayika Indian philosophers was that happens so fast that those philosophers think, well, no, there is no split second of seeing things or experiencing things without immediately recognizing, because the recognition is immediate. And actually, Kant's philosophy thinks that too. It thinks that your concepts almost preconceive what you realize. And although the thing in itself you miss, because you structure it according to your concept, you never reach the thing in itself. Kant's different from Buddhism. I'm sure he was in his previous life a Tibetan yogi who was studying these epistemological things. I have no doubt, because they weren't doing that. India had lost that tradition by then. But in fact, the Buddhists, by their meditative self-awareness cultivation, they realize that there's the underlying sort of substance of cognition is where the human being is out in a field, and the human being is a field being. So, for example, you and I, our fields overlap in their epistemology. You and I look at the same visual object. And of course, we each see it differently, But we are out there each of us is out there. Our body includes the field of our objects around us, the visual being important because they're the most remote objects, visual and sound, you know. And so if you hear sound in a far valley and then you're out in that valley, but then you reorganize and you're here and there's a sound out there. But it's so quick that if you don't develop a deeper awareness of your own mental mechanisms, your samskaras in your mind, they call them in India, then you think it's just, it is that you're immediately, it's an object to you, and that it was a sound out there by itself, and you just happen to turn your attention to it. So it takes a little self-awareness about your process of cognition to realize that we reify. There's a great word. It's actually a Marxist word, but it's a great word. Coming from a different context, but it's common in his writing in English. But it means make a thing out of a notion, to reify something. You know, you have a notion of something, then you think it's a thing out there. You know, but the process of reification of the human brain and habit is very, very powerful. And of course, the biggest one is yourself. You know, that's the one thing we have unquestioning. The normal being in our sense of organization of ourselves is that we're here. As my old Mongolian Geshe used to say, we are here too also. But he said, so we're not wrong that we're really here. We're here, or rather that we're here is not a mistake. He says where we make a mistake is we think we're really here. And I don't know if you ever read Jacques Derrida, or the deconstructionist movement in Western sort of philosophical and literary theory. They finally broke away from this, and they had this idea. They realized that the mind and language construct things that we see. But then they take that because they're trapped in the worldview of materialism, which is the modern worldview, and they think that means everything really is nothing, you know, kind of thing. And sort of we're just making it up, and they deconstruct everything, you know. So everything dissolves, and therefore he writes books, you know, and every word he uses surature, it says under erasure, and he puts lines, you know, like says like the tripod, and there's a line through the tripod, you know, like, and it's all very cool, and it's kind of fun actually. But he's getting in the area because Manjushri is at work in our barbarian Euro-American cultures. Manjushri is at work, so it is bubbling up to us that you see, because emptiness doesn't mean everything. Now the misunderstanding of this is that if there's no subhava, there's no bhava at all. As I say, if there's no intrinsic reality, there's no reality, and it's nothing. And that's how people think. People think Nagarjuna is like a skeptical nihilist. So far, they used to. And that's very wrong. Because the discovery of emptiness, first of all, the word in Sanskrit, shunyata, is not the word abhavatva, which means then nothingness. They have words for nothingness. And they didn't use that word. In fact, they even say the middle way of philosophical centrism, which is a middle way between absolutism, sometimes they say eternalism or absolutism, and nihilism or annihilationism. You know, we have to make these words up in English, but that's a middle way. So it's definitely not nothing, right? Because even nothing is empty, which means that not only empty, but nothing in fact is actually also nothing. Big news flash to people who are scared of it. I love to do a trick on large audiences who are unsuspecting because they don't know psych philosophy. And I say, who here is afraid of nothingness? A lot of hands shoot up. And then I say, well, if a real life Rambo, not a fake, you know, Sylvester Stallone, but a real live one was to stand up here in front of all of you and say, I'm afraid of nothing. What would you think they were saying? Actually, they would be more rational than you, because they were saying that means they're not afraid of anything. It doesn't mean they're afraid of nothing. So if you're sitting around being afraid of nothing, it shows your irrationality of thinking that your concept has to be a thing out there, even the concept of nothing, you follow? Which is the obvious non-thing. It's not out there, or in here, or anywhere, right? Okay. So that's a big mistake. So beings are not totally unreal, and they're not really real. They're just real. But since they think they're really real, The type of reality I have is called illusorily real. It's like illusion. It's like your face in the mirror, the person you see in the morning in the mirror is not totally unreal, but it's not really you. So it's an illusion of you, right? Which you don't think twice about, you easily get that. So we're all like a reflection in the mirror of our emptiness, which just means really our relativity. It doesn't mean our non-existence. Okay? So the deeper we go with that, we get down to now all animals have that according to Buddhist epistemology, not just humans with language. The reason that animals helplessly are driven from internal impulse, which is really irresistible to them, to jump on another one that they meet to eat, and to feel that the difference between them and the food that's running by is absolute, and they don't have to respect the life of that entity. It's just food. Or someone will jump on them and eat them, is that they have the same intrinsic reality habit or intrinsic identity habit or intrinsic objectivity habit that we do. And their misfortune is they can't question it because they don't have, Nagarjuna doesn't speak their language. They didn't have a lion Nagarjuna writing in lion language yet. Buddhas do emanate as lions and go try to teach lions to kind of relax and open up and not be so absolutist about their lion desires, so that they can be reborn eventually as like these beings that are all puzzled about everything and don't know, whether to, be there or go blind, to be polite. Deer in the headlights, that's human being. And that's a good thing, because then which car and which way should I go and what should I do? So we can tell our own ignorance, not because we didn't read some Vedanta Sutra or some Buddha Sutra or something, but because when we feel an impulse of lust, of hate, of anger, of injury, of outrage, we feel that's unquestionable. I have to act that out. It sort of comes out of the gut and it moves my fists. And some lunatic, will move their trigger finger, if they have one, in a cuckoo place like this, filled with guns. And that means you're just as helpless to these things coming from your inside as you are from a truck coming at you from outside. Because when you're driven by an impulse that you feel comes from an absolute source, you can't question, then you'll destroy yourself. I don't know if you know Eckhart Tolle, but everybody does in sort of spiritual seeking circles. And his story, how he discovered, but he thinks it's just going into now. But actually what he discovered was something about the relativity of his inner states. He was very depressed and he was going to kill himself. He was circling down the drain kind of thing. Because one impulse was coming out of him of unworthiness and shame and disgust and etc. that was coming out and out. And it was one voice telling him whatever it was all no good. And he was compelled, and he was like ready, he was looking for methods, for methodologies, as your Indian intellectual would say, or methods. And then suddenly he found another voice in himself, questioning that voice, saying, well, why should I believe you? That's all worthless, and I might as well kill myself. And it was also, and then he realized that's me too. And he could begin to work with his inner impulses and mechanisms and monologue, and not just believe. Like that one nun, I love it. She said, I think other people have said it, but there's one Buddhist nun I know here in America has the second Buddhist nunnery. And she says, don't believe everything you think, which we tend to do, right? Okay, so that's sort of the intrinsic reality in English anyway. Nisvabhava is the Sanskrit word, topic, And we have a pair of concepts. Human beings do in all languages of relative and absolute things. We have relative, and absolute really means just non-relative. And so, since everything we do think about is binary, we tend to think there's something that's absolute. And then people make it into God, they make it into demons, they make it into different things. And modern people make it into nothing. And so they take so the relative thing, we don't realize, but the particular ones we associate with, we make absolute to ourselves. And the human being particular, when human beings are in a rage, they will kill themselves. It's a frustration, drive a car into a wall or something, or to hit the person they're angry with. If it's a person, they'll drive it into a wall. If they get depressed, they will kill their relative self, which is what they are, based on the absoluteness of their worthlessness. They will kill by feeling they're commissioned by an absolute God. And they can't resist that commission, and they'll kill or give their life, right? So they'll sacrifice a life being to an idea. So that's the role of absolutism in our life. And then when we make nihilism into the absolute, well, then we get into a thing where we think that nothing matters, and we become totally irresponsible. And because we think, well, what the hell? The worst thing can happen is I just cease to exist, and I never remember that I did. And even if I kill 10 people, they'll cease to exist. They'll never remember that they did. And they won't remember that they were alive, so they won't mind that I killed them. It creates complete psychotic irresponsibility, which is the nature of the modern culture, why we're all destroying the planet, because of that ideology that has us in its grip. So Nagarjuna's discovery was that there is no such absolute anywhere in anything that functions as a relative. The absolute actually, in one sense, is irrelative to the relative, and in another sense, it is the whole of the relative, and in a way, there is no whole of the relative, because it's infinite. The idea that it has a boundary is irrational. A boundary means, there's something on two sides of the boundary. So therefore, a boundary implies that there's something beyond it. Therefore, you can never make a final boundary. You follow? So, like infinity even. When we think infinity, we think going out there. But actually, we're all infinite too. Because we couldn't be excluding infinity, or it wouldn't be infinite. It wouldn't be inside us. You follow? And so it sort of throws everything into a kind of openness. But what it throws things into, this discovery of intrinsic reality, intrinsic objectivity, and intrinsic identity, or identifiability. This is the greatness of Buddhist psycho-philosophy, if you will, therapeutic philosophy, like Ala Wittgenstein, the greatest of them. And is that instead of it all being like nothing, as too many modern Buddhists think it means, emptiness, it means that you are responsible, or in a way you could say you are co-responsible for your reality, because you are co-creating it with other beings, you together. And gods too are working on it. But there's no one who ultimately owns it all. We're just like ciphers or robots running around animated by some one thing that's outside of it all. We're all responsible for it. And that's why then Tantra grows from that. Tantrayana. There would be no need for Tantra or for any kind of yoga that deals with the subtle or coarse physicality whatsoever if the dualistic thing applied, which was get out of the body, get rid of prakriti, go to pure spirit, and disappear. And who cares about the body? And the body will never turn out to be anything but impure and a pain in the neck. The reason that the body then becomes, because you have to be responsible for your body. Because your body is, in a way, in its relativity, is absolute. Your continuum is what the absolute is. There's no place outside of it that's absolute. Emptiness is not a substratum of all of this. Emptiness is all of this. Right? So then what becomes your absolute concern? The people who still going on projecting from the inner feeling that I'm absolute to thinking there's an outer absolute nirvana I'll go to, that's somewhere else, or a nothingness that I'll collapse into as a materialist, or as any kind of nirvikalpa state, the samadhi state that I'll leave a town forever in. Anybody who thinks it's projecting from thinking that inside there's a separate place It's the real me that dictates these things, and these urges come out of it, which I hadn't done anything about. It's just the way I am. You know what people say when they get to be a real pain, and they don't want to think critically about how they're not seeing things from another perspective. They go, "That's just the way I am." They go like that. You know, that's just like Yahweh, the stupid scripture. Excuse me. I am what I am. Yeah, great. That told me a lot, Mr. Burning Bush. You know, that was a really big statement. I am what I am. Thanks, but are you going to be nice? Is what I want. Or are you going to be a pain? Right? That's what we want to know about each other, right? So emptiness means whether we're going to be nice or a pain becomes our absolute concern. But there's no other absolute. So to make everything nice is the absolute. And then luckily it turns out when you make everything nice, you feel nice yourself. And then it turns out that is the overriding concern of sentient life. And even it turns out there may be no insentient life. It may all be sentient. You know these and I guess my health guru, food guru, Anthony William, the medical medium. When you have that morning celery juice, fresh juiced celery juice, unmixed before they're on an empty stomach to really your liver just, oh, thank you, liver. But at best, if you thank the celery, you have to say, oh, thank you, celery. Thank you for coming and helping my liver deal with all the toxins of the modern corrupted, cancerous food system. Thank you, celery. Organic celery. Heavens to Betsy.
I've got a question for you.
In case you don't know, it's a really cool thing. Morning celery juice. Anthony Williams. Okay. So are you getting about, is there any more confusion about this intrinsic reality? Well, you're going to be more confused in a minute because we're going to meditate.
Okay. Bob, I have a quick question for you on this.
Oh, yeah, more.
Yeah, on Svarupa.
Yes?
Svarupa.
Svarupa, that was I call intrinsic objectivity.
That's intrinsic objectivity?
Objectivity, yeah.
So Patanjali in the Yoga Sutra lists resting back into the Svarupa as a result, Svarupa, of chitta vrittis stopping. So chitta vrittis stop, mind stops, seer rests back into the Svarupa.
Okay.
So do he and Nagarjuna disagree?
Yes.
Okay.
Basically. Because he is operating on the Sankhya dualism. And Nagarjuna is challenging dualism, not only Sankhya dualism, he doesn't really go after Sankhya's, but he goes after dualistic Buddhists, because there are dualistic versions of Buddhism called Vaibhashikas and Sautrantikas. You know, and the dualists are the ones who think that things are really real, and that escape from the things is really real, and is something else. And so Nagarjuna disagrees with that. And in a way, he realizes that in itself is a step up from just not even thinking about it, period, and just running around and being controlled by all kinds of Svarupas all over the place. The mere idea that you could somehow merge with the Svarupa, your mental functions or something, or seize them, is already a critical self-reflectiveness. But it's still getting stuck in a layer of the fact that there's a reality of the object apart from you and a reality of the subjectivity within you. And so you're still caught in dualism. And the Sankhya thing is based on that. And modern readings of Patanjali, like, for example, Mishra, the well-known one that was here since the 60s, and there are some others, but modern of them tend to read into Patanjali Vedantic non-dualist ideas. They tend to, and that's okay, because they are sort of there. It's like in the Vimalakirti Sutra, there's a wonderful thing where the Manjushri and Vimalakirti are having this kind of cryptic dialogue, what the Chinese Taoists call light conversations or enlightening conversations. And he says, but where is the enlightenment of the Buddha to be found? And then Vimalakirti says, it's to be found in the 62 incorrect philosophical views. It says, That's where it's to be found. He didn't say in the right view. He said in the 62 incorrect ones. Because even any kind of philosophical view is a critique of some lesser view or a completely unreflective view. Remember Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. So that's less pessimistic, more pessimistic than Buddha or Nagarjuna. They're saying the unexamined life is just going to be a pain. It's definitely worth living, but it's going to be a pain. And so if you examine it, deeply enough, it will be a bliss. So that's the movement from pain to bliss. It's not from pain to not existing. It's from pain, existing painfully and frustratingly, to exist stressfully, to existing blissfully. From stress to bliss, that's what it is. Okay? So, and also, the Shunyata non-dual thing, according to the Buddhists, and according to me, but not according to, quote, modern scholarship, is the Buddha himself taught the Mahayana Sutras and the Mahayana Prajnaparamita teaching, and what later emerged in a treatise of Nagarjuna's treatise, non-dualist thought, to a small group of people among his monks. And he told them, he said, I don't want you spreading this teaching widely in the country. It should not be spread. I'm entrusting these scriptures to the Nagas. I want them to keep them in the underworld, in the watery underworld. Excuse me, in the watery underworld. I want you to keep them for me. In 400 years from now, this country will be ready for them. And of course, nobody thinks a human being would have such a vision of history and a sort of sociological insight to see how things would develop. But I believe that that's because at Buddha's time, monism kind of ruled philosophically in India, which sort of meant that you were really a Brahmin, or you were really a Chandala, or you were really a Vaishya, or you were really a Kshatriya. And Buddha was shattering that, and the best way of shattering that at first was, and Kapila, before Buddha was born in Kapila city, Kapilavastu, where Sankhya was, where he lived, the guy who originated Sankhya Sutra, whatever it's called, Sankhya Karika. And so that dualism was a good dualism, and the dualism was breaking the individual away from the collectivism of the caste system. The sort of that you just had, if you were a woman, you just had to do what your mother did. If you were a Kshatriya, you had to do what your father did. Buddha was a prince; he had to be a king like his father and be the commander-in-chief and fight the wars with the neighboring city-states and the neighboring tribes. And he couldn't question that. That was unquestioned. So his saying, actually, no, Dad, I don't think so. It was a big shocker to the poor father. In the system was when your grandson was born, you could retire, even at 40 or 50, and go to a ashram and relax, I mean, not a celibate ashram, you go there with your wife and servants and whatever, if you're a king, but go to Florida, go to Sarasota and take a break. And then your son had to do the job of ruling, and then his son became the crown prince. So when Buddha's son was born, Dad said, "Oh, I'm so happy, here you go, here's the throne." And Buddha said, "Oh, no, sorry, Dad, I'm not, you have to hang in there a bit longer, because I don't want to be a king, I'm going to be a Buddha. I'm going to be a Dharma king." And the dad said, "Really? Well, but that's terrible. You have to care for your people." He says, "Yeah, I do care for my people. But my people's problem is not defense, social security, health, caste, whatever it is in the caste system, temporary prosperity, because their real problems are death, sickness, old age, and even birth is a problem. People, women die all over the place giving birth. That's a problem. Not to mention the baby having a slight squeeze there for a day or two. So now I want to deal with those problems. And then Dad said, "Oh, they don't deal with those. The gods deal with those. And the priests, they tell the gods to be nice about all that." So then Buddha said, "Well, gods are doing a crappy job. I think we can do better. I'm going to do better," which was probably crazy of him. And the Dad said, "Yeah, okay, son, very nice. Nice that you have that attitude, messianic attitude. And I have a nice psychiatrist for you and some tranquilizers, and temporarily until you get them, I'm going to lock you up, which he did. And then Buddha had to escape and so on. Siddhartha had to, you know the story. So then that's a huge shock, in the restart. What are you doing to me?
Restarting you.
What?
I was restarting.
Why did it stop?
I don't know. That's what I'm trying
Then
to
it's
figure out.
making me hoarse.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, but back to the philosophical, I don't want to go to the story. So now I want you to meditate, please. Meditate a little bit. Now we're going to meditate on the idea of selflessness. And some of you already know this from me, and that's good. And we can always do more. And some of you, this will be the first time, and it might be very interesting for you. It's considered the most important thing because of the three principles of the path, the thing I sent you. The first is to develop some kind of transcendence.
Sorry about that.
Some kind of transcendence, and detachment, renunciation, freedom from shifting your priorities, where you no longer care about making your first billion, no longer care about being rich and famous, whatever, and you realize that all those things are illusory goals in the sense that they won't really be satisfying in the long run. And you instead want to answer the question, as they say in Zen, the big question of life and death. And you want to discover if there's any higher self or higher awareness or higher being. And so that's the first principle. The second one is when you have really achieved that little bit of detachment from the sort of conventional mundane goals. And then you feel much better. And then you see other beings chasing these mundane goals and you realize they don't feel well because you compare them with how you feel. So you begin to feel compassion for them. And you want to do something to help them feel better the way you do. But those two by themselves are good things and essential foundational things. But by themselves, they will not bring you to moksha, to liberation, to bodhi, to enlightenment. What you need now is prajna, the transcendent wisdom that brings you to the confrontation with reality of yourself and of the world. Okay? So there's four keys. There are various sets of them, but there's a set of what are called the four keys of meditating on selflessness. And the first key is to remember, use your memory, your smrti, which by the way is the word that translates as mindfulness in this mindfulness craze that is sweeping the country. Just means remembering, actually. So it means remembering where you are in the moment. It's taking that function of memory and aiming it at what's going on inside you now. That's actually what mindfulness is. But anyway, you are going to do a special remembrance, and that is you're going to remember, you're going to work on remembering, rather. It takes work. Some incident in your own experience where you were accused by someone, preferably who you cared about, of doing some wrong thing that they thought was wrong anyway. Betraying them, harming them, taking their thing, breaking their thing, eating their thing, or whatever it was, something. But it was an instance. It wasn't an instance where you did it, which is a different thing to remember. It was an instance where you were innocent of doing it, and you become upset that they would think you did it, the injustice of it, and the meanness, and even the fact that they could think that you would do such a thing if it's a serious thing. And so this feeling of injured innocence is what you are to cultivate a vivid memory of. And even more complicated, you're to figure out how to observe yourself in the incident in the past as if you were peeking on yourself, spying on yourself from behind a curtain or something, so that the main part of your consciousness was like a method actor, and you are reliving the experience and feeling the emotions and feeling like I did not, I would not, never, I don't do things like that, I didn't do that, etc. So the feeling that all of those, that complex of feelings of injured innocence, please try to remember an incident like that. It's a surprising task to be asked to do, isn't it? Those of you who haven't heard this before. This is considered very critical. And looking into the personal self. So meditate this. It takes a bit of effort. And you don't want to make anything out of it right away. You just want to re-experience how you felt. And how you, and even feel like that again. As we can do when we remember some vivid experience, vividly. They do experiments, put fMRIs and electrodes on your brain, and it's almost as if you're reliving the experience. That's what you should try to do. If it upsets you, that means you're making progress, because you're discovering the upset of being falsely accused. And feeling it and reliving it. They say even to develop a deep concentration about emptiness or selflessness, you should do this first step for a few weeks. And when you do remember such an incident, you might veer into remembering the following events, where if the accuser persisted, your feeling of injured innocence and hurt feeling probably morphed into righteous indignation, and then morphed into righteous anger. Protesting of innocence and anger that you would be so accused. But those are less useful states to contemplate. So you should draw back from remembering the subsequent steps in such incidents and try to focus on the initial shock of feeling the injured innocence. How could they think? I would never. I did not. Of course, we can't do this in detail now, but maybe even this little moment has given you a feeling of how you felt in your stomach, in your solar plexus, in your throat. In the movies, when the hero is framed early in certain types of movies, and then if one identifies with that hero, one gets frustrated because they sort of stammer and stutter about their alibi or about their innocence, to the posse or whatever it is. And they never give a good, lucid explanation to the mob that's chasing them or whatever, And that takes a whole movie for them to, exonerate themselves by finding the bad guy who framed them, right? That's a whole trope in drama, right? So that becomes because you feel choked up. When you feel like that, it feels that you feel all choked up when you start protesting your innocence. And you feel a tightness in the solar plexus, sort of around the heart and in the abdomen. You can, if it's really deep, a deep accusation, you can feel butterflies in the stomach, nausea, even nausea. I mean, a basic constriction inside. And then when you have relived this very vividly, and here we're just compressing it, I'm just showing you the step, unless it's something extraordinary, it's not possible in a short time to really vividly get there. But it said then, one pursues this, when you succeeded in this step, the point of the criteria that you have succeeded in mastering this step is when you acknowledge to yourself that either Yajnavalkya's statement in the Upanishads that your little self is not real, it's not the real self, or Buddha's statement that you lack the real your little self is not your real self or not any self, which are really a very similar statement. They do agree, actually. You realize that you don't agree with either, right? Not Yajnavalkya or Buddha. That on a gut level, you're not really agreeing with them because you feel you're really you're really innocent. You're the real you is the innocent one. That's the real me. You kind of, you haven't necessarily found it, but it seems to be making itself manifest to you in your choked feeling, in your feeling of constriction, and your feeling of real solid, something solid in there, that's you. And therefore that you're selfless or that you're only a super self and not your personal self. You realize that those enlightened beings who gave those kind of teachings, either of supreme self or supreme selflessness, that they knew that the people they were talking to, that they were challenging the people they were talking to. They were not expecting some facile agreement from those people if they were intelligent. They were challenging them. And so when you have mastered this first key, you realize that the teaching of lack of intrinsic reality of yourself, lack of intrinsic objectivity of yourself, lack of intrinsic identity of yourself is something you don't viscerally agree with. It's not how you feel about it. But if you have some respect for Buddha or Yajnavalkya or great yogi teachers, if you think maybe they were onto something, they were great philosophers or great scientists or great psychologists or whatever you think, great spiritual leaders, had great spiritual insight, then you're kind of willing to take up the challenge. And you decide, okay, I feel like I really am here. It's the real me here. I do feel that. And so when I hear somebody else say, I'm really over there, then I feel, okay, that mirrors how I feel. So that's good. So we're agreeing on that. Subliminally, we agree. However, other ways we might not, but we agree that way. But somebody who says, no one is really here, neither me nor you, I don't really agree, but what I should do is double check. So I'm going to look for this solid self I feel inside me. I feel it's there inside me. I'm going to look for it with all my solid, determined effort. And if I find it, I will send Nagarjuna and Buddha a telegram. And if I fail to find it, I will cope with that issue when I get there. And this leads to this brings us up the second key point, which is called the key of logical and cognitive pervasion, vyapti. in Sanskrit, meaning if there's a real self in me and I make a real effort to find it, I should find it. It should be there. It should be really there. And if I fail, then that's a new situation. But it's one or the other. I'm not going to act like, well, maybe it's there, maybe it isn't, and one way it is, one way it isn't. No, I'm not going to go for any third option because I am a conventional person, and I either go out the door or I don't go out the door. I don't do something other than go out the door or not go out the door. I don't walk through the wall. I don't fall to the floor. I do yes or no is conventional, but it is yes or no, practically speaking. I live on yes or no. So you make that commitment because in the quest for the self, that one has first acknowledged it exists there, one feels it exists there rather. In that quest, it gets you into deep inner areas that you don't want to leave vague because there could be all kind of vague, weird byways and highways that you would contemplatively get stuck in. So you kind of insist on a practical outcome because it's a practical matter. If I'm this real solid self, and I should live up to that. And if I don't, then I have to see how that will affect me. So then, when you've got those two under your belt, you then start to inventory yourself contemplatively, which I hope you're doing now. And the 5 aggregates are the useful schematization of the body-mind complex that has been found over many, many centuries of meditation and introspective inquiring to be a useful blueprint of the living being. So that's your body, your aggregate of sensations, your pleasure, pain, and numbness, your aggregate of conceptions or ideas, all your words and your images and your inner thoughts, seemingly identifying different things and so forth. Your aggregate of emotions and sort of deeper structural samskaras, like structures in among your mental functions, and your consciousnesses, your consciousness in all its variety and multiplicity. These are what's called the 5 aggregates, or 5 body-mind processes. I call them in the Heart Sutra. But the usual word is skanda, which means a heap, actually. Aggregate sounds a little more organized than a heap, but the actual Sanskrit word skanda means a heap. Your material heap, your sensational heap, your ideational heap, your emotional and functional heap, and your consciousness heap. 5 piles. So the first and the most coarse one, the most obvious one, is your material process or heap or aggregate. So you do a body scan and you look through all your innards, whatever picture you have of them, including your brain, your heart, your nervous system, your flesh and blood and bone, your organs, and your vessels internally, to see if there's a real, whatever your name is, in my case, Bob, is there a real Bob in there? That certainly felt like something solid in there when I was deeply into being injured innocent, misunderstood innocent. Something felt really real in there. Okay, I scanned in the body, seemed to be like in the chest area, but maybe it was really in the brain. So you inventory yourself, and then we have the good fortune of our wonderful material scientist colleagues and their atom-smashing quantum efforts, particle physicists, high-energy physicists, And we can realizing that our body also, we get past going through the wet wear, you know, the nervous system, the brain and everything, the meat wear. That was great wear, hey? We get rid of all that. Then we can go to atoms, you know, the cells, the molecules, the atoms, subatomic particles. And we can stick with the more brave and more intelligent of the quantum physicists who agreed that things dissolved under analysis. At the super micro level, you just analyzed them to pieces and you didn't know what was, you couldn't find anything. You were left with dark matter and energy, which you can't find. So that dissolves, which you only hypothesize, actually, by reading some effects that shouldn't be there if something like that wasn't there. So things dissolve under analysis, in other words, material things. So you feel strong conviction that the self, that your solid thing that you felt there is not material when you really contemplate the material like that. Then you look through this, then the first level of your mind, of the non-material, is the sensational. You know, like your body right now, you feel that whatever you're sitting on your skin, the weight, your gravity pushing your weight down, you know, the cloth of your clothes on your skin, the different parts of your body sort of rubbing against each other. You have a bunch of sensations, some comfortable, some uncomfortable, and some with no basic feeling, sort of numb. And then you don't, if you analyze all of that, you don't really, there was a strong feeling of congestion when you were injured, innocent, you remembered. So when you had that strong sense of, I'm really here, innocently here, and unreservedly, righteously, innocently here, seemed like you were gripping your solar plexus or your chest or your arms around something. But there's no stable sensation of feeling this solid thing in there, or sensing it in there. So you feel that it's not in the sensational aggregate. That's still too coarse for you. Then you go to the ideational one, and of course there is an idea of yourself. But then when you look at it, and mentally you look at the flow of thoughts and ideas and images in your mind, you realize they're like a cloud and swirling, shooting here and there. You know, when you become self-mindful about all the thoughts in your mind, it becomes like a cacophony in there. And you, at first, and you realize that there's no, even if your name always seems to be Bob, then even Bob, you know, where's Bob? Is it in the B or the O or the B that you land on, and etc. You know, you can analyze the sound of the letters, how it looks, and you realize that it's changed. And also, how could it be your essence? There's million and zillion Bobs, and yet they're all very different. They're not you. So this Bob thing is uniquely you. You don't find a little one of those high school charm things with a gold chain, a little gold thing that says Bob, hanging around your heart, or a barcode, or a whatever. Even your DNA constantly changes, they have discovered. So you reject then the aggregate of your conceptions and you go to the deeper feelings, emotions, the deep structural things, and again, you don't find any inherent Bobness or Bob function there. Could be, you know, when your heart beats, it doesn't go Bob, 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 you know, or whatever your name is. And so you'll get past that. But each one you can look at carefully depending on whatever sort of sense of that category you have, you know. And then, of course, you pretty quickly will move to your consciousness itself. And of course, the one thing you have, the idea that there's something about you that never changes. You're always you. You're the main. You have the continuity of all of your changing experiences as a you that doesn't change. That's how that feeling of I am feels, that it lands on or it rises from. When you go I, you know, it seems to come from this unchanging place. So it must be an awareness. So then you look at consciousness. And then when you look at consciousness, you realize that when you're awake, a lot of your cognitions are sense cognitions. You see things, hear things, smell things, taste things, touch things, and think things. There's 6 senses in Buddhist psychology. The mental sense is the one that has internal objects, like imaginary objects. When you have your mind's eye, you see something in your mind's eye, you think a thought and hear a voice inside your head with your mind's ear. And that's your mental consciousness, they call it, your mana vijnana. Consciousness itself, the barest level, is really a kind of an awareness of being the subject of many objects. And so you very quickly realize that all your sense experiences are very changeable because you're scanning things with your eye, you're hearing different sounds with your ear, smelling and tasting and touching different things as you move about. And your thoughts also are churning along there. So an aspect of your mind awareness, mental consciousness is always changing too, but there still seems to be one thing there that doesn't change. That's still your continuity. It's what gives everything else the continuity, that it lands on this thing that registers without changing. You feel that it's there. And you know that maybe that sounds illogical, but you don't care. You keep looking for it internally. You make a big effort to find it because that's what you promised in taking up the challenge of Siddhartha and Yajnavalkya's challenge that your little self is not the real self. You're trying to verify that there is a real self in there. So you turn and twist and push and you try to find it. And you then get into it. If you have the concentration on this, the endurance, which it takes endurance and persistence and focus, that you find that is the one place that deep in the subjectivity, there's the sense that there's the real me there. And then you turn to verify it, like, okay, put your finger on it, pinpoint it. But then when you do that, you don't find something to pinpoint internally. And then you get an awareness, you don't give up because you don't find something. You say, well, I don't find it because now I'm looking for it. So it's turned out of my field of inner looking, because your sense of inner looking is like modeled on your idea of looking at some external object. You're looking internally and you're turning around your mind's eye in your mind, trying to find your mind's eye's consciousness. And you keep swiveling out of your field of inner vision. And then if you have the concentration, you will spin even. You will feel like you're being an inner dervish. And actually you can get feeling of dizziness and nausea from this if you really intensely do it. If you take time really doing it and you're really persistent, because you really admit it to yourself, you really feel you're really there, and you're really on the brink of finding yourself there, and you spin and you spin and you spin. And you become what is called the diamond cutting drill, which means both it's cutting into a diamond and also it's a drill that is a diamond that's spinning like a drill bit on a diamond, which, looking for a diamond. And that's the diamond cutting wisdom of the diamond, one of the Prajnaparamita Sutras. And if you have the focus and endurance to sustain this point of being a point of being a point of being a point, what will happen is, they say, that the momentum of the energy and momentum behind the drilling and the unconscious resistance to that seems to provide a hard surface to be drilled on, both kind of self-destruct because the drill kind of goes back drilling into itself. It's of course, an indescribable thing that happens, but one does one's best. And there's one sort of melts into, you could say, explodes into, falls into, and a threshold of this falling into will be a feeling of fear, if you have, as I say, if you're sustaining this. And the fear is that somehow I'm lobotomizing myself. I may be destroying my awareness. I may not even ever know who I am. I may become like a amnesiac. I may be nothing. I may obliterate myself. There's a fear of that, which fear actually can only be overcome by realizing ahead of time and by making it almost visceral that there is no state of being destroyed. There is no nothing. And that's so that any feeling that I'm falling into an abyss of nothingness is overcome by that. And then one enters the space-like equipoised samadhi, where one's point of concentration becomes a field of infinite space, where you have a feeling of moksha, of releasedness, being released into that infinite space, which comes as a terrific relief, actually, because you've been so much twisted down into trying to find and into being and finding and being and finding and being and not finding and being and finding and being. Your inner core. And then there's a slight danger of thinking that this inner core is just this vast space, which I think we've talked about a little bit already. And although one enjoys it when one first slips into and there are various depths and levels of this. So even if you only have a superficial level of having done this, it's very enjoyable. And it's like a feeling of release and sort of problem solved, sort of thing, even though in some way it can't be necessarily well articulated. But then the idea is beyond articulation, blah, blah, blah. But then if one is well ensconced in sort of the scientific, philosophic process of critical insight, of vipassana, of critical seeing, critical thinking, then even in this state where one doesn't have a head and a brain, you feel like you feel like you leave your body and you're everything behind, brain, body, point of view. Your point of view becomes a field and so on. You feel like that will happen, at least to some degree. But you have the momentum of then evaluating what this field is, makes you scan it in a certain way. And when you do that, by that momentum, the field ceases to obstruct your vision of where you are, physically even, of your meat space being, of your mind space being, of the world around you. And the world around you arises. And the first time it happens, it feels as if the field you achieved faded. And then you're sort of back to square one. And again, that can be misinterpreted as thinking that that field is a place away from the differentiated field of objects. It's the place of emptiness. It's the place of transcendence, the place of moksha, place of nirvana. Because it felt like a release while in it. But the emptiness wisdom, the emptiness intuition, doesn't settle for this place being the absolute place. Because the expression absolute place, of course, is a contradiction in terms. If it's absolute, it's not a place. Place is relative to other places. If it's a time of the experience, then that time is relative to previous times. When wasn't having that experience, and when the when the world redawns again, the differentiated processual world, cause and effect, there's a boundary between when it appeared there and when it didn't appear there, which delimited the sense of the space of release. So that makes it that relativizes even that marvelous, expansive moksha type experience. And the first time this happens, it has a certain depth, but it probably, except in an exceptional case, will not be the conclusive one, because one can go deeper and deeper and deeper in this subtle area. And so, but what one has at that time is that there's no, this self that I felt solidly in there in my chest area, diaphragm area, at least it's not the same as any aggregate of my body or mind that I normally am experiencing myself as consisting of. Because that's a very pluralistic bunch of causal processes. And there's no non-causal, fixed, unchanging process. Within that, one becomes very convinced, and one becomes very, therefore, aware that the feeling I had when I was injured innocent has an erroneous component about it. But then one's inquiring mind doesn't settle for that, and then thinks, well, gee whiz, maybe it's because that real self is something apart from these prior body-mind processes. There's some higher entity or more subtle entity that is changing consciousnesses even. And so one then looks for a fixed self that's somehow connected to the aggregates of body-mind. One goes back, in other words, into an inquiry process. I mean, it could be next day, it could be next hour, it could be next part of the samadhi, but we're just rehearsing these things. And in that one looks for like such a fixed thing that might be the container of all these processes, the substrate of all these processes, the owner of all these processes, the inner witness of all these processes. And there one gets into a reviewing in thought experiment how there could be any kind of thing that would relate to through ownership or location or containment or any different, whatever different possible relationships there could be, and goes into all of them and keeps bumping into the problem that anything attached even by a rope or a cord or, TV transmission, brain waves or whatever, to something changeable like the body-mind complex would be changed by being connected to it. If it was like a super subtle spiritual transistor-like entity, registering all the waves of speech and thought and mind and body of myself as a being, registering all of that would be changing it all the time. So it couldn't be this fixed self that I admitted to myself when I started, I feel is at my core. And then that will even deepen even more one's sense of one's emptiness and one's selflessness. Which now, as you can see, it is not one's non-existence as a body-mind process. It's just seeing that there is no such fixed thing that's somehow apart from that process and yet connects to it without being changed by the connection. So then one has reached what one calls the royal reason of relativity, where you say, I am empty of any fixed, unchanging, relevant self, relevant absolute self, and therefore am only a relational self, constantly changing at every level of subtlety or coarseness, and totally interreacted and interrelated with all other relative things in the universe. And the more you kind of do that, as you go on in your work and yoga and meditation and seeking, the more viscerally you will become aware of what the intrinsic identity habit is, the intrinsic reality habit is. the intrinsic objectivity habited. And by the way, you don't need to be a Buddhist to do that. The great French philosopher Descartes, I don't know if any of you have ever studied his thought. He has a meditation, Les Méditations. His famous cogito ergo sum achievement was precisely because he went through a process just like this, what we just went through. And actually what he discovered, contrary to what people think, and how he can be misunderstood, and maybe how he even misunderstood himself, he reached a point where he acknowledged he could not find that unchanging point of subjectivity, that to be thought of as the real soul or self. He couldn't find it. He acknowledged that. But then and so cogito ergo sum just means that he acknowledged that the only way that he was there was by thinking he was there, or even doubting he was there. So, which was actually a positing of his relational self, because asserting the pronoun, saying, I think, or I am. And he said, well, I couldn't find that I, because I was looking for it as an object, but it's only there as a subject. Mm-hmm. But then, because he didn't have a Zen master there, or someone like that, or a debate partner like a Nagarjuna to say, yes, well, that's fine. So you are there because you think you're there, and the I that's thinking is a relational thing. So you're asserting being there, and you are a completely relational process, and there's nothing unchanging about that. Cogito ergo sum, I am because I'm thinking. Thinking is a relational process. But what Descartes did, unfortunately, was he said, well, but therefore that I is the one thing I can never doubt. It's indubitable. It's an absolute. And then he remained an absolutist. If he had a Zen master, he would have gone, whack! Bong, you know. They would have seen stars. And it would have been very different, his outcome. But he did. And there's a whole story actually about how he lived in a monastery where he was writing, and it was at a guest house where some guy had come back from India, a missionary, and there's a whole story about it, who had learned Vedanta or something. There's, people are slowly unearthing this huge influence of the Asian thing, even in those days of the 17th century. The Indian Enlightenment, unacknowledged, and then of course never completely absorbed in a way, until it's still not now, but now almost getting there. J.S. Mill also, David Hume went to France, and he also stayed in that place. Anyway, never mind that. That's fine. Okay, did you get a little something there?
Yeah.
Did you get a little something there?
Yeah.
So I think therefore I am doesn't mean that you are some absolute. It means that you're a relative. So it means yes, and therefore, if you're a complete relative, and everyone is your relative, and the universe is your relative, then you are responsible for your relationships. And that automatically your job becomes ameliorating them as best as possible, because there's no escape from them in some way. But ironically, or fascinatingly, apparently, when you fully viscerally know that, and the inferential knowledge of it, mental knowledge of it, reasoning knowledge of it is extremely powerful, like a microscope or telescope or magnifying glass, whatever you want, extremely powerful lens through which to develop a concentration and samadhi and yogic power and bring it down against your visceral feeling against that. Like the yogi, all the many stories there are in all forms of spirituality about mystics and yogis, west or east, where somebody's all holy and they've been up in a cave, and then they go to town finally after many years, they're all saintly, and then somebody kicks them in the bottom, steps on their toe, and they get mad. Because that visceral thing still was untouched. Okay? Is that good? Yeah. Any questions? Has anybody never been falsely accused? Never, ever? Anybody always done it? Actually, it's a tendency of people to somehow think they did something.
Yeah.
I remember as a child, and the whole class was there, and who did such and such, like this, or that kind of situations. I always first double check, maybe I did it. I always have a feeling.
Bob,
What?
We have a question over here.
Yes. Oh, yes.
in terms of technique, could you speak to the difference between something like Dzogchen, where you're meditating on the concept of selflessness, versus a technique like Vipassana that you mentioned as well, where selflessness appears at some point, where you sort of get to
Selflessness
it.
what?
Selflessness appears or may appear at some point.
May it be there?
May appear, may become apparent, versus
Sort of
something
just
like
sort of, you mean leap into selflessness.
versus Dzogchen, where you meditate on the idea of selflessness, as far as I understand.
In Dzogchen, you meditate on the idea of selflessness?
Is
You do?
that the case? Yes.
You do? I don't think so. Dzogchen, first of all, Dzogchen is Tantra, high Hatha Yoga Tantra. And therefore, it's the highest Hatha Yoga Tantra in the Nyingma order. And which is similar to the higher levels of what are called Dzogrim in the Sarma, the main, what are called the Sarma orders. Nyingma just means following the older translations done in the 8th and 9th century. And Sarma means the new set of translations done in the 11th, 12th, 13th century. That's really what they mean, those names. And the Sarmas are 3 or 4 of them. And the Sarma Tantras, they're called Dzogrim, the stages of perfection or completion. And Dzogchen means the great completion or the great perfection. And they're doing the same. So they are not shortcuts of any Vipassana or Shamatha. They are the most advanced type of Shamatha and Vipassana. The clear light or a great seal or a great completion or great perfection stages in whichever school, they are the most advanced possible thing. And therefore, they are really predicated, they are really only achievable traditionally by people who've already mastered some degree, some high degree of shamatha and vipassana, right? And shamatha is the one-pointed concentration on whatever topic, the ability to really mobilize and focus the mind really long-term, which also involves the need to be able to master the pranas, the vayus, including prana, vayu, and all 10 of them, there's 10 of them. So because the pranas are the vehicle of thought, to develop one point of thought, the pranas have to be mastered and controlled, which is the reason for all the bodily, the coarser bodily, and then also the subtle body, chakra and neural patterns and so on. So all of that has already been dealt with by anybody who's a suitable vessel for Dzogchen. Although it is perfectly legitimate in Tibetan tradition to kind of signal to the student that there are these wonderful advanced things. And they have there's the whole thing of you get the Dzogchen empowerment, which is a mistranslation for an initiation. Because you think it's some sort of like going to a filling station and getting power, which it isn't. It's just it's a licensing sort of type thing, a permission thing, rather than the power to do it. Power to do it comes from your previous development and the instruction from the teacher. But then in Dzogchen, as you know, there's all these things they call ngondro, preliminaries. And that's the whole structure of the path. That involves renunciative, ability not to be completely attached to everything. That involves cultivating genuine compassion for others. And that involves this, what we're talking about now, this understanding of selflessness. It's absolutely, anybody who teaches that that's a shortcut and you just can do that and go there, all that other thing is just a waste of time, is misleading the student. And not only misleading, but actually harming them in this sense. That those super advanced things are where you sort of are playing around with the idea of it's all perfect and I'm perfect and I'm Buddha. Because it's all perfection everywhere. Everything's great, perfect. So when you have someone who is still imprisoned in what you would call a naive absolutism about their inner self, that one that you looked at, like when someone kicked you in the ass and you got really pissed off, and then they didn't have any right to, and you'd been perfectly innocent, and you're getting this tight feeling in your chest, you know, and you blew up in some way. If that ever happened to you, heaven forbid. You're taking that solid sense in there, and then you're somehow putting on a thing like, oh, the absolute real thing is I'm perfect and I'm Buddha, etc. And then that leads to what Mr. Jung was so afraid of all the Eastern traditions, megalomania. That leads to megalomania. And then you hear people throwing stuff around like, and then the people who taught you that sometimes turn out to be pain in the neck, and they do nasty things to people, and they're greedy. And then people over there just, that's crazy wisdom. Because if you think that it's all perfect, it doesn't matter what you do. That's totally wrong. It always matters. Enlightened people don't harm anybody. They're incapable of harming others because they are the others. They feel they are if they're truly enlightened. So how could they just cast off someone or just throw them away or harm them or just treat them like an object? Not possible to such a person. So when you say, is it this versus that? It isn't this or this. The understanding that my gut structure as an ordinary human being is a kind of error. I'm gripped by ignorance. It's the beginning, first thing in Yoga Sutra. There's klesha, right? They have the word. And there's these kleshas or avidya, you know? And they have matsarya, you know, stinginess, and they have kamaraga, and they have, dvesha, and these kind of things. You know, same addictive emotions. I don't call them afflictive. I call afflictions. I call them addictions. Inner addictions that one has, you know, emotional addictions. And there is a level of, and also the mental understanding of them through valid inference is something that we beings luckily have the ability to reason. And we can, and even we feel like this, we won't do it if we can reason that it shouldn't be done. And we also can reason, you know, in epistemology, they have what's called the directly manifest object and the indirectly unmanifest object. Then there's the super indirectly, super unmanifest one. And then they have three means of knowing these. The direct one can be dealt with by sense intuition in a Kantian sense, meaning unmediated. The indirect or unmanifest one can be reasoned one's way to, you know, where there's smoke, there's fire. You know, you don't see the fire, but you see the smoke, etc. Then you go find the fire, you know, when you're freezing to death, right? So inference is a powerful thing in life. So it takes an inference at first to a reasonable thing to realize one is in error about feeling that one is the center of the world, which is the ordinary feeling, right? Does anybody here not think seriously, secretly, like Neo in the Matrix? Maybe I'm the one. My old Mongolian guy used to say that, my guru, first teacher. He said, long before the Wachowski brothers in the Matrix, he said, everybody goes around secretly thinking, I'm the one. Everybody here in this room now, unless one of you is enlightened, in which case I apologize, but I don't really have to because you don't mind. That is, everyone here thinks they're the center of the room. It's not rocket science Buddha's teaching. Everybody, I'm the main person here. This is my seminar, my retreat, my lesson, my class, blah, 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 blah. Everybody thinks that. Then that's why everybody's paranoid in the room. Because each person who thinks they're the one here, they know nobody else really agrees with them. And not only that, they have the temerity to think they're the one. Over there and over there. And it's all nice when we have a good cook and do plenty of yoga mats. So cool. But, you know, when the lifeboat is sinking, we then see people like, well, I really am the one, you know, like in the Titanic, right? You know, the people that were glad. So I'm just saying, that's all the first noble truth is. If you think you're the one and the world disagrees, you're under stress, right? So if that's the innate feeling of even the healthy, normal human being, self-responsible to some extent. I'm the one. And then you tell that being, you're perfect and you're Buddha.
Right.
What do you expect? How do you expect them to behave? If they can get away with it. They can go to another country and act exotic because I'm Japanese or Tibetan or Indian or God, I'm from Siberia and I just came out of it. I was riding a yak here for 100 miles. And like, therefore, whatever, I'm so far out. And oh, gee whiz, he seems like a real bastard, but he's Tibetan or he's oh, no, that's ridiculous. Use your common sense. So nobody gets past the lesson about trying to find out, do I have a distortion in my psyche of a self-centeredness, not moralistic. I'm selfish. I might be, oh, I'm the one, so I'm so nice. I'm so helpful. I'm really good. I'm the good one. People get into that. So they're nice. But it's a cognitive thing. I just am, my feeling of I'm the center is a real feeling. I'm really the center. That's the exaggeration. That's the error. That has to be viscerally experienced eventually. But in order to really get the energy to want to viscerally experience, at least to start with, one has to rationally understand it is a mistake. Therefore, I am guided by a mistake. Therefore, I have to control that mistake. Therefore, I have to develop a one-pointed concentration. And so now I have a way that I understand the world as a relational thing. And yet there's still a piece of me that wants to not be in relationship. Wants to not be totally responsible to relationship. Wants to bulldoze through. Because I'm still something separate. And then that can be finally realized meditatively. And one can then feel free. And then where the Dzogchen comes in, where the Dzogchen comes in, where the Buddha pride, as they call it, which they call Buddha pride. There's a stage you're told you have to be really confident you're Buddha. You're God. In the Hindu thing, they'll be your God. You're Shiva in Shaiva Tantra. You're Vishnu and Shiva. That's not some big Vishnu and Shiva somewhere. You are it. Then that's a reconstruction of taking responsibility and doing even sort of practically magical, helping others. And yet at the same time, it's safe for you to do that because you know viscerally it's a construct. Any sense of self-identity that you have is a construct, which therefore you're responsible for that. You cannot be irresponsible because you're responsible. You realize you're constructing yourself. You're contributing to what is you're related to everything. So then you can't be irresponsible. You're responsive to beings, and then there's a level where it's inconceivably wonderful, actually, beyond this. This being imprisoned into thinking, I'm the one, and everybody else just doesn't know it. And somehow I'll persuade them, or I'll fool them into thinking that they don't need to get after me, but I'll just quietly be the one myself. Whatever you have to do in the hopelessly unmanageable situation of being the one versus the universe, then the great thing is being one with the universe. And it's easy if you think you and the universe don't really exist or don't exist. So your oneness with the universe is where none of you are existing, which is the sort of last danger. It's all just a field of light. But yes, it is like that. But that field of light actually crystallizes into all these beings sitting around here with you. And all of them sitting around Somalia and Arabia and on many other planets. And you are one with all of them, and therefore we have a lot of work to do. Does that make any sense to you? So this thing about the people who are doing the psychological studies on meditators, they do the thing of thinking you're fine from beginning. How does that affect you? And then they're putting their fMRIs on people and how do they feel unstressed. Maybe they do feel a little less stressed at first because somehow they're told it's okay to feel you're the one and really everyone else is unreal. So maybe they feel a little better. There are all kinds of delusional states that people can get into. But to just be one of the ones and to yet be in bliss by being one of the ones, that's a special trick. In the way it's not, there's no trick. It only comes from understanding one's own reality somehow, supposedly. And vipassana means analytic seeing. So seeing through. And the real thing to see through is not, I mean, seeing through the table, the chair, the atom is all good. And that's what's called objective selflessness. Objects are selfless. They go to, like this chair, you know, it's selfless. Which means you can thought experiment this chair to pieces. And also you could take this chair and throw it into an electron accelerator if they would let you over there in Switzerland and they had a big enough mall, you know, like a what do you call it, where you pour into something, you know, a small hole, you pour into the chair, chop it up and throw it in there. And then that chair would there be, where's the Higgs boson in the chair? You know, it has some bosons in there. Like that. But luckily, but the bosons wouldn't help the chair be a chair without a bunch of dark energy holding it together, which are all the goddesses, the yin of the universe, which they don't know how that works yet. So that's good when we do a thought experiment about atoms, about chairs, and that's why we're at this stage in history, which I love, which we're very optimistic, which we're in a very good stage. Even the fact that we're destroying the planet with our industrial effluence, not to mention our politicians who are connected to the industrial effluence and producing them, is good because it somehow is making the subliminal point, which is reverberating through the masses subliminally, that we're so powerful that we can destroy ourselves en masse and even destroy the planet. And therefore we'll all be dead and there'll be no life and there'll be no children and no nobody, nothing. You know, it would be like terrible. And that's really, you know, Al Gore's great book, The Earth in the Balance, was really the threshold book of that, I would say, almost, from the point of view of the materialist thing, that we're going to fix everything because it's all material. He showed that the human activity can destroy the world. So we really, and the atom bomb was also a big message of impermanence, subliminally to everyone in the planet. Because the atom bomb, after all, you know, you and I feel we're cool, you know, I mean, you're cooler than me because I'm old and I have a few pains that you don't. But, you know, I think, okay, I got this body here. But every atom in this body caught in a chain reaction would pulverize any sense of physical presence that I might be having, you know, instantly evaporate. Because the atoms, the balance of the energy itself is much more powerful than whatever's holding it together if it's triggered by a certain type of chain reaction, which is triggered. From Buddha's point of view, the core component of an A-bomb or a hydrogen bomb is not the plutonium mechanism and the little different things that James Bond is always undoing at the last second by snipping the green wire. That's not it. The core component is human hatred. Is the absolutism of the human hatred. That, you know, we're going to destroy that enemy from the atoms out. It's a crystallization of hatred that does that. So a really powerful thing, hatred. From Buddha's point of view, you know, because mind is powerful, you know. But they also, the Buddhists, the Madhyamaka Buddhists, some types of Buddhists will say mind is everything, but Buddhists will not say mind is everything. They will just say mind is the most important factor to deal with for a mental being, to deal with their situation, ultimately. They won't, they're the highest, what they consider the most sophisticated, subtle, most well-developed, rational one, would say that there are things that are not one's mind. And so, and as when you get to a deep point, mind and energy, vayu and manas, are not different. So you can reduce to mind or you can reduce to matter. And neither one is absolute thing. This is a very important point for you philosophically inclined people. In the Buddhist thing also has what they call a hermeneutic tradition, and that is a theory of interpretation that is very solid, can be very well reasoned through and argued, which is that no description of the world, its ultimate condition, is ultimate. The ultimate nature of the world is indescribable, which doesn't mean it isn't there, but it's indescribable. And all descriptions of it are relative. And that's good enough in relative context. So there's like relative truth can be true enough. and false enough. So there still is a full true-false dichotomy in specific situations. So therefore, all teachings are non-dogmatic, except for that statement, which is a kind of negation. That's a little bit dogmatic. You know, that in other words, there is no clue. It's like the Popperian idea of science, that all scientific laws, theories, etc., are hypothetical, accounting for experience up to then, but awaiting falsification by further experience, if you follow. So that was great. I love Buddha. That's so cool. It's meditating away, it's tree, devil's chasing him. So cool. Then he says, oh, wow, things are great. I know everything. I have realized it all. I'm sorry, I can't explain it to you. It's unexplainable. But I can help you figure out how you can figure it all out. But then you won't be able to explain it either. But we can there's a lot of vectors we can use to bring us toward it, and one of them is reason. Because reason aims the shamatha, and reason directs the critical vipassana, and it brings it right up into opening, to clearing away the skein, the structure of the concepts that we get from our immature cultures and unenlightened societies and genetic streams that have us live in error still. And the error being the one is greater than the rest of it, and the rest not agreeing, and the one always living under that stress. Animals, to them, you know, they say the suffering of the animal, the subhuman animal kingdom, only in that sense. Every animal has been human. Every human has been every animal. Life is beginningless. Every individual one, even, not just genetic. Although genetic is a way of thinking about it, which is helpful, at least. But they're all interconnected. And but when you fall below the human and you haven't got the self-critical type of thing, then it's chigla chiksa, anyonya bhakshana in Sanskrit. One eating another. I always like to joke, that's why they don't talk. When they meet someone, it's either consume or be concerned. So there's no time to chat. So they don't talk. They have a little bark and growling and something. But basically, wham, it's food, or you're just seeking, because they're just seeking food. They don't have that self-restrained critical thing that the weirdo human does. I love Dzogchen. We have a Tibetan doctor who comes here to Menla, who I adore him, who is, his name is Nida. And Nida means sun and moon, actually, is what it means. Nima is sun, Dawa is moon in Tibetan. Which, by the way, is in Hopi, Dawa is sun and Nima is moon. Did you know that? It's the two same words, but opposite? It's very interesting. When the Hopis met the Tibetans, they had a big freak out over it. And they decided it was because the polarity, through the planet. Hopi land and Tibet, the Himalayas, were once two poles of the planet many, many aeons ago. And therefore, the left and right were opposite, and sun and moon were opposite. So they called the moon the sun, and sun the moon on the two different sides. That guy came up with some big theory like that. And they were really freaked out when they discovered that. I still am freaked out. His name is Yida. And he teaches Dzogchen. And he loves it. And he teaches it right away. And then, but you get a little hint, a little clue. And in a way, I don't mind that. I'm happy that they kind of do it, because at least it helps us all with one of the things that we all really need in our culture, because we are all really depressed. Totally. We've been depressed for thousands of years by a bunch of religious fanatics telling us we're sinners and we're funky and we're horrible and we're all going to hell. Unless some high priest comes and I don't know what, like grabs us and like rapes us in the back room or something. I don't know, really sick shit. Or tortures us, and then they torture people and say, "Oh, repent," and they think they have a good, they have a good intention. They think if they torture you ahead of time, then they're going to make a hell right there in the Inquisition chamber, and then you'll maybe have a chance of purgatory and get up there. They didn't anticipate that in the 21st century or 20th century, Pope Benedict would cancel purgatory. So we're totally depressed. Then we escape from that depression by deciding bravely that they're all full of it and we're just going to be nothing. And it would, so then to heck with them, to hell with them, he said. So because we're nothing, and so that means it's all nothing, so we can just do what we feel like and not bombard with them. And we're really smart now that we know that it's all nothing, and we looked at the planets and atoms, blah blah blah, and we can all make like 1,000-year jacuzzis. And actually, there's one crazy guy out there at Google and Stanford. He's going to like make plastic robots. And they told me, that's some crazy Russian who was really into it. I said, well, what's lovemaking be like when you're clanking immortally there against the other one and two things are clanking? Oh, no, wait, they'll be soft. They'll be biological robots. So that's just a bunch of BS again. Buddhist studies, imperfect Buddhist studies. And, it's all BS. And the thing is, that's depressing. We're nothing, really. Why would we bother? Because once you think that your destination is nothing, that means your reality is nothing. Subliminally, your little absolutist habit pattern has like a little chamber of nothingness right in the center of your heart, where you're going to withdraw into by killing yourself or dying normally if you can stay comfortable until that time. And if you're getting uncomfortable, call Jack Kevorkian. He'll come up there with his guillotine. And it'll be legal in Holland or California, right? Yep. And the religious fanatics will not get a chance to keep you alive when you're in miserable pain, so they can torture you with Club 77. And, and anything you do is pointless. Why bother be yogi? Feel better, put your foot behind your ear. And it's nothing. It will come to nothing. You and the bad guy both mean nothing. And so that's why we're so unable to control our impulses in this culture. Because we want to be nice and we have a greedy thing or a hostile thing, violent thing, and we want to be nice, and then we sort of put some energy against the urge to be violent or to freak out in one way or another. Put that energy. The energy builds up like an electric circuit, and then clack, there's a circuit breaker. What's a circuit breaker? There's a fuse box over the vast gulf of nothingness that we're headed to. So it doesn't actually matter that much to restrain myself. So if I want to go berserk for a while, then what the hell if I can get away with it? So there's no sense of, actually Garrison Keillor had a great thing for our culture, which was the teaching of Lake Wobegon and the Lutherans in Lake Wobegon. They really prayed. I like, religious people. They have a good side. And that is, whenever they're in any situation, those people that Lake Wobegon, even when they're happy, what they do? They look at each other and they say, yep, it could be worse. That's what they say. And that's a really great thing when you realize it could be worse. That's in a way what hell means. It could be always worse. When you're feeling bad and the situation is bad, and then you want to just flip out, the thing that really controls you is a complete continuum of it could be worse. That gives you the power to control yourself. It diffuses the absolutism of your feeling of impulse, and it gives you the strength to control it. It could be worse. It doesn't matter because it's nothing. It removes that sense of restraint. That's why I always say, Oprah, when she encountered dear Eckhart, Meister Eckhart's reincarnation, Mr. Tola, and she felt the earth move when she thought she could get into the now, which she did, and which is great. And I guess people can do that. But the real thing that will make the earth move for any of us is when we conquer the delusive statement by the materialists that we are really nothing, which we all subliminally believe. And we realize that we are really something. We are a continuum of something, and that something is going to be forever. And it could be worse. Forever. When we realize that, This gives us the power to really turn around and find out the meaningful thing, because there's no avenue and escape into meaninglessness. So everything means something in the relative world. Ultimately, it all doesn't mean anything. That it means that it just means exactly what it does in relationships, because the ultimate thing means relative. It's all relative. And that really shifts us. That's the big shift. That's where planetary responsibility arises from. You tell Charles Koch, or any of those other libertarians, or that guy, Mr. Mercer, who can only talk to his cat, but who's mathematically got himself to be a zillionaire. You tell them that if they screw up this planet, they'll be reborn on it. And something makes them think that might be so. They will change their behavior. They will vote socialist, democratic socialist, instead of that crazy libertarian, which leads to libertarian means totalitarian by me. I'm free to be the totalitarian. That's what it means. Doesn't mean everybody's free. It always leads to totalitarianism, anarchy. People accept